In the shadow corners of medieval Europe, women prepared dangerous concoctions that could end their lives as easily as preserve their reputations. They consumed toxic herbs, swallowed caustic powders, and endured agonizing internal procedures, all to convince others that they remained untouched. This wasn't vanity or superstition, but survival in a world where a woman's social worth, legal status, and physical safety depended entirely on the perceived state of her body. The medieval obsession with female virginity created a complex system of social control that governed everything from marriage negotiations to inheritance laws. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, European society developed increasingly sophisticated methods for detecting and verifying female chastity, while women simultaneously developed equally sophisticated methods for circumventing these examinations. Medical treatises, legal documents, and confessional manuals from this period reveal a hidden world where women risked their lives to manipulate the very biological evidence that society used to judge their worth. This practice emerged from the intersection of limited medical knowledge, rigid social expectations, and desperate circumstances. Medieval physicians believed they could determine virginity through physical examination, while women discovered that certain substances could alter their bodies in ways that would deceive these examinations. The resulting cat-and-mouse game between social control and female agency created a dangerous underground knowledge system that persisted for centuries, documented in medical texts, court records, and religious writings that reveal the extraordinary lengths to which medieval women will go to protect themselves. Medieval physicians operated within a framework of anatomical knowledge that was both detailed and fundamentally flawed. The most influential medical texts, including works by Avicenna, Albertus Magnus, and the anonymous authors of the Trotula manuscripts, describe specific physical indicators that supposedly revealed a woman's sexual experience. These texts were copied throughout Europe and formed the basis for medical examinations that could determine a woman's fate. The primary focus of these examinations was the hymen, which medieval doctors called the virginal membrane or seal of chastity. However, their understanding of this anatomical structure was limited and often inaccurate. Medical texts described the hymen as a complete barrier that would be definitively broken during first sexual intercourse, leaving unmistakable evidence of the encounter. This oversimplified view ignored the natural variations in hymenal structure and the many non-sexual activities that could affect its appearance. Medieval medical practitioners also believed they could detect virginity through urine analysis, breath examination, and observation of walking patterns. The Secret of Mulierum, a widely circulated 13th century text, claimed that virgin urine was clearer and had a different odor than that of sexually experienced women. These diagnostic methods created multiple ways for a woman's chastity to be questioned and examined, requiring equally diverse methods of deception. The medical establishment's confidence in these detection methods was absolute, despite their fundamental inaccuracy. University-trained physicians wrote extensively about the reliability of virginity testing, creating a scientific justification for practices that served primarily social and legal functions. This medical authority gave weight to examinations that could destroy women's lives, making the stakes for successful deception extraordinarily high. Medieval European society constructed elaborate legal and social systems around the concept of female virginity, creating consequences that extended far beyond personal reputation. Marriage contracts explicitly addressed the bride's chastity, with substantial financial penalties for families who misrepresented their daughter's status. Dowry agreements often included clauses that allowed the groom's family to demand compensation or annul the marriage if the bride was found to be sexually experienced. Legal codes across Europe prescribed specific punishments for women who engaged in premarital sexual activity. The Germanic law codes, including the Civic Law and various town charters, established fines and social penalties that could impoverish entire families. Canon law, enforced by church courts, imposed additional spiritual and temporal consequences that could include public penance, exclusion from religious ceremonies, and permanent social stigma. The economic implications of lost virginity were particularly severe for women from merchant and artisan families. These communities relied on marriage alliances to establish business relationships and secure economic stability. A daughter whose chastity was questioned could destroy carefully negotiated partnerships and threaten the family's commercial prospects. The financial stakes created powerful incentives for families to ensure their daughters could pass virginity examinations, regardless of the actual circumstances. Noble families faced even higher stakes, as questions about female chastity could affect inheritance rights, political alliances, and dynastic succession. Court records from across Europe document cases where disputed virginity claims led to extended legal battles, military conflicts, and the downfall of prominent families. These extreme consequences created an environment where desperate measures seemed reasonable compared to the alternative outcomes. Women developed and transmitted knowledge about virginity deception through informal networks that operated parallel to official medical and religious authorities. This knowledge system included information about herbs, procedures, and substances that could alter physical examination results, passed down through generations of mothers, midwives, and female healers who understood the desperate circumstances that drove women to such extreme measures. Midwives occupied a particularly important position in this knowledge network. As the primary female medical practitioners, they possessed detailed anatomical knowledge and had access to the herbs and tools necessary for various deceptive procedures. Court records suggest that some midwives specialized in helping women prepare for virginity examinations, though they risked severe legal consequences if discovered. The secretive nature of this practice means that much of the specific knowledge has been lost, surviving only in fragmentary references in legal documents and confessional manuals. Convents and religious communities also served as repositories for this specialized knowledge. Nuns, particularly those who served as infirmarians or dealt with female medical issues, often possessed extensive knowledge about female anatomy and herbal remedies. Some religious texts contain coded references to substances and procedures that could help women in desperate circumstances, though these references are often disguised as discussions of other medical conditions. The transmission of this knowledge required extreme discretion, as women caught sharing information about virginity deception could face charges of conspiracy, witchcraft, or corruption of morals. This dangerous environment created a highly selective knowledge network where information was shared only among trusted individuals who understood the life or death stakes involved. Medieval women employed a range of toxic substances to create physical conditions that would confuse or deceive medical examinations. The most commonly documented substances include tansy, pennyroyal, savin, and ergot, herbs that were readily available but extremely dangerous when consumed in the quantities necessary to produce the desired effects. These substances could cause severe internal bleeding, cramping, and other symptoms that would mask or mimic the physical indicators that medieval doctors sought. Tansy, a common garden herb, was frequently used despite its severe toxicity. When consumed in large quantities, tansy could cause intense abdominal pain, irregular bleeding, and other symptoms that would make thorough physical examination difficult or impossible. Medieval medical texts acknowledged tansy's dangerous properties while also documenting its use for various gynecological purposes, creating an ambiguous knowledge base that women could exploit. Pennyroyal presented similar risks and effects. This mint family herb could cause severe internal reactions that would create the appearance of various medical conditions. Women who consumed pennyroyal in sufficient quantities often experienced prolonged illness that would delay or prevent virginity examinations. However, the herb was also known to cause permanent damage to the liver and other organs, making it a desperate measure that could have lifelong consequences. Ergot, a fungus that grew on rye and other grains, was perhaps the most dangerous substance in this arsenal. Ergot poisoning caused intense contractions, hallucinations, and severe pain that could last for days or weeks. Women who consumed ergot-contaminated preparations risked permanent disability or death, but the dramatic symptoms could also provide cover for the physical trauma that would make virginity examination inconclusive or impossible. Beyond herbal poisons, medieval women employed various physical methods to alter their bodies in ways that would deceive examination. These techniques, documented in fragmentary references in medical texts and court records, involved mechanical interventions that were extremely dangerous but could create the physical conditions necessary to pass or avoid virginity testing. Some women used sharp objects to create controlled injury that would heal in ways that mimicked the expected results of sexual activity. This practice required detailed anatomical knowledge and precise execution to avoid fatal injury. The risks were enormous, as infection, excessive bleeding, or improper healing could cause death or permanent disability. However, for women facing certain social destruction, these risks seemed acceptable compared to the alternative consequences. Other mechanical methods involved the insertion of various substances or objects designed to alter the internal physical structure. Medieval medical texts contain oblique references to these practices, usually in the context of condemning them as dangerous and immoral. The specific techniques are rarely described in detail, both because of their secretive nature and because medical authorities preferred to discourage rather than document these practices. The timing of these physical interventions was crucial to their success. Women had to calculate when examinations might occur and prepare their bodies accordingly. This required sophisticated understanding of healing processes, examination procedures, and the specific expectations of the doctors or midwives who would conduct the testing. The complexity of this planning demonstrates the elaborate lengths to which medieval women would go to protect themselves. The success of virginity deception often required the cooperation or corruption of the medical professionals who conduct the examinations. Court records and ecclesiastical documents reveal cases where midwives, physicians, or other medical practitioners were bribed or coerced into providing false testimony about examination results. This corruption created another layer of risk for women attempting deception, as they had to identify trustworthy accomplices while avoiding detection by authorities. Some midwives developed reputations for discretion and reliability in these matters, though they charged substantial fees for their services and cooperation. The financial arrangements around corrupted virginity examinations created an underground economy that operated parallel to legitimate medical practice. Women and their families often paid enormous sums to ensure favorable examination results, sometimes impoverishing themselves to protect their social standing. Religious authorities were particularly concerned about corruption among medical practitioners, as it undermined the social control systems that the church helped to maintain. Ecclesiastical courts prosecuted cases of false testimony in virginity examinations with particular severity, recognizing that corruption in this area threatened the entire system of social regulation based on female chastity. The need for accomplices also created vulnerabilities that could expose the entire deception network. Corrupt practitioners could be discovered and forced to reveal their clients, leading to widespread prosecutions that destroyed multiple families simultaneously. This risk meant that women attempting virginity deception had to carefully evaluate not only the medical risks of their chosen methods, but also the reliability and discretion of everyone involved in the process. Medieval legal systems developed specific procedures for prosecuting cases involving virginity deception, recognizing it as a form of fraud that could have far-reaching consequences for families and communities. Canon law courts, secular tribunals, and guild authorities all claimed jurisdiction over different aspects of these cases, creating a complex legal environment where women could face multiple prosecutions for the same offense. The evidence required to prove virginity deception was often circumstantial, relying on medical testimony, witness statements, and confessions obtained through various forms of pressure. Legal documents from across Europe show that these cases often hinged on the testimony of medical practitioners who had conducted examinations, making the corruption or cooperation of these professionals crucial to both prosecution and defense. Penalties for proven virginity deception varied widely depending on the jurisdiction, social class of the accused, and specific circumstances of the case. Common punishments included substantial fines, public humiliation, exclusion from marriage markets, and in some cases, physical penalties that could include imprisonment or corporal punishment. The severity of these consequences reinforced the desperate circumstances that drove women to attempt such dangerous deceptions. The legal process itself created additional risks for accused women. Court proceedings were public and could destroy reputations even if charges were not proven. The interrogation procedures used in these cases often involved invasive questioning about intimate details of the woman's life and body, creating a form of punishment that preceded any formal verdict. Different regions of medieval Europe developed distinct approaches to virginity testing and deception, reflecting local legal traditions, medical knowledge, and social customs. Northern European countries, with their emphasis on Germanic law codes and guild regulations, created more formalized examination procedures that required correspondingly sophisticated deception methods. Mediterranean regions, influenced by Roman law traditions and Islamic medical knowledge transmitted through Spain and Sicily, developed different testing procedures that focus on alternative physical indicators. These regional variations meant that women who moved between areas had to adapt their deception strategies to local expectations and examination methods. The availability of specific herbs and substances also varied by region, affecting the methods available to women attempting virginity deception. Northern European women had access to different plants than those in Mediterranean climates, leading to regional specializations in deception techniques. These geographic differences created distinct knowledge traditions that were transmitted through local networks of women. Urban areas typically had more sophisticated medical practitioners and more rigorous examination procedures, while rural regions often relied on traditional midwives whose knowledge and methods vary considerably. These differences created opportunities for women to seek examination in areas where the procedures were less rigorous or where they could find more sympathetic practitioners. The demand for virginity deception services created a shadow economy that operated alongside legitimate medical practice. Women who possessed the knowledge and skills to help others pass virginity examinations could command substantial fees, though they also faced significant legal and social risks. This underground market included not only medical practitioners, but also suppliers of herbs, instruments, and other materials necessary for successful deception. The pricing of these services reflected both their danger and their value to desperate clients. Court records suggest that families often paid amounts equivalent to substantial portions of their annual income to ensure their daughters could pass virginity examinations. These high costs meant that virginity deception was often available only to families with significant resources, while poorer women had to rely on more dangerous self-administered methods. The secrecy required for this underground economy created additional costs and complications. Practitioners had to maintain multiple layers of discretion, often operating through intermediaries or coded communications that increased the complexity and expense of their services. The need for absolute secrecy also meant that clients had little recourse if services were inadequate or if they were discovered by authorities. Some practitioners developed sophisticated operations that included safe houses, specialized equipment, and networks of suppliers. These elaborate setups required significant investment and careful management to avoid detection. The most successful practitioners often operated for years or even decades before being discovered, suggesting that the demand for their services was both consistent and substantial. The development of virginity deception techniques reveals the extent of medical knowledge that medieval women possessed despite their exclusion from formal medical education. The sophisticated understanding of anatomy, pharmacology, and timing required for successful deception demonstrates that women developed and maintained complex medical knowledge systems outside of official channels. This unofficial medical knowledge often surpassed that of university-trained physicians in specific areas related to female anatomy and reproductive health. Women's direct experience with menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth gave them practical insights that male medical practitioners lacked. This knowledge advantage became crucial in developing deception methods that could fool even experienced examiners. The transmission of this specialized knowledge created informal educational networks that operated parallel to official medical training. Older women taught younger ones not only about deception techniques, but also about female anatomy, herbal medicine, and other health-related topics that were excluded from formal medical curriculum. These educational relationships created bonds of trust and mutual support that extended beyond the specific issue of virginity testing. The sophistication of some deception methods suggests that medieval women were capable of conducting complex medical procedures and understanding subtle physiological processes. This capability challenges assumptions about medieval women's knowledge and agency, revealing a hidden world of female expertise that operated despite social restrictions and legal prohibitions. The knowledge and practices associated with virginity deception overlap significantly with activities that could trigger witchcraft accusations. The use of herbs, the performance of secretive procedures, and the possession of specialized medical knowledge all fell within the categories of behavior that aroused suspicion from religious and secular authorities seeking to prosecute witchcraft. Women who were discovered attempting virginity deception often faced additional charges related to witchcraft or sorcery, particularly if their methods involved unfamiliar herbs or procedures. The secretive nature of deception networks also fit the pattern of conspiracy that authorities associated with witchcraft, making participants vulnerable to expanded prosecutions that could affect entire communities. The timing of major witchcraft persecutions often coincided with increased scrutiny of women's medical practices and knowledge networks. Periods of social tension or religious reform frequently saw simultaneous crackdowns on both witchcraft and activities like virginity deception, suggesting that authorities viewed these practices as part of a broader threat to social order. Some women who possessed knowledge about virginity deception techniques may have been specifically targeted during witchcraft persecutions because their expertise threatened the social control systems that religious and secular authorities sought to maintain. The destruction of these knowledge networks through witchcraft prosecutions would have eliminated important sources of information and support for women facing virginity examinations. The women who survived their attempts at virginity deception often faced lifelong health consequences from the toxic substances they consumed or the dangerous procedures they underwent. Medieval medical texts contain references to chronic conditions that may have resulted from these practices, though the secretive nature of the original activities makes definitive connections difficult to establish. The liver damage caused by herbs like tansy and pennyroyal could create ongoing health problems that affected women for decades after their initial use. Ergot poisoning could cause permanent neurological damage, while mechanical interventions could lead to chronic pain, infection, or reproductive problems. These long-term consequences meant that the price of successful deception could be paid throughout a woman's entire life. Some women may have developed addictive relationships with the substances they use for deception, particularly if they needed to maintain certain physical conditions over extended periods. The pain-relieving properties of some of these substances could create dependencies that were difficult to overcome, leading to ongoing consumption that compounded the original health risks. The psychological impact of these experiences also created lasting consequences. Women who had undergone dangerous deception procedures often lived with ongoing anxiety about discovery, health complications, or the need to repeat similar measures in the future. This psychological burden, combined with physical health problems, created complex patterns of suffering that extended far beyond the original desperate circumstances. The decline of virginity deception through poison consumption occurred gradually over several centuries, driven by changes in medical knowledge, legal systems, and social attitudes toward female sexuality. Renaissance medical texts began questioning some of the anatomical assumptions that underlied virginity testing, though the transition away from these practices was slow and uneven across different regions and social classes. The development of more sophisticated medical knowledge gradually undermined the confidence that authorities placed in traditional virginity testing methods. As physicians gained better understanding of female anatomy and the natural variations in physical structure, the reliability of examination results became increasingly questionable. This medical evolution reduced the stakes for women while also making deception less necessary. Legal reforms in various European jurisdictions began placing less emphasis on virginity as a determining factor in marriage contracts and social standing. The rise of merchant classes and urban economies created alternative sources of social value that were not dependent on traditional concepts of female chastity. These social changes reduced the desperate circumstances that had driven women to risk their lives for successful deception. The Protestant Reformation contributed to changing attitudes toward sexuality and marriage, though the impact varied significantly between different regions and religious traditions. Some Protestant communities maintained strict standards for female chastity, while others developed more nuanced approaches that reduced the extreme consequences of sexual experience. These religious changes created a more complex social environment where virginity deception became less universally necessary. The medieval practice of consuming poison to fake virginity represents one of the most extreme examples of the lengths to which women would go to survive in societies that use their bodies as measures of their worth. While modern medical and social understanding has revealed both the dangers and the ultimate futility of these practices, examining their historical context provides insight into the sophisticated ways that medieval women navigated impossible circumstances. The documentation surrounding virginity deception offers valuable evidence about medieval women's agency, medical knowledge, and social strategies. These historical records reveal that women were not passive victims of oppressive systems, but active agents who developed complex methods for protecting themselves within the constraints of their societies. The sophistication of their approaches challenges assumptions about medieval women's capabilities and knowledge. The persistence of these practices across multiple centuries and regions demonstrates the power of social systems that reduce women's value to their sexual status. Even when individual women successfully deceived authorities, the underlying systems that made such deception necessary remained unchanged. This pattern reveals the structural nature of the oppression that medieval women face and the limited options available for individual resistance. Modern historians and medical researchers continue to study medieval virginity testing and deception practices to understand how societies construct and maintain systems of social control through the regulation of female bodies. These studies provide perspective on contemporary issues while reminding us that the fundamental tensions between social expectations and individual agency have deep historical roots. The courage and desperation revealed in these historical practices reflect a universal human desire for autonomy and survival in the face of impossible circumstances. Medieval women who risked their lives to maintain their social standing were responding to the same fundamental drive for self-preservation that motivates people in all historical periods, using whatever knowledge and resources were available to them within the constraints of their time and place. In the end, medieval women who consumed poison to fake virginity were making rational calculations about survival in a world that offered them few alternatives. Their practices seem shocking to modern sensibilities, but they emerge from the same determination to control their own lives that continues to drive human behavior across all historical periods. Their stories remind us that the struggle for individual agency in the face of oppressive social systems is neither new nor easily resolved, requiring understanding of both the constraints people face and the extraordinary measures they will take to overcome them.